What if the most dangerous geopolitical earthquake of this decade did not begin with a thunderous missile launch or a formal declaration of war, but with a silent, backroom agreement in a building in Beijing that forgot to account for the one variable that dictates the survival of nations: the cost of being underestimated? Welcome to World Horizon View. I am your analyst, and today we are stripping away the veneer of standard diplomatic posturing to dissect a masterclass in economic warfare. You are here because you understand that the official news cycles are designed to comfort, not to inform. In the next few minutes, we will unpack how a coordinated attempt by Washington to surgically restructure the North American economy turned into a fundamental shift in the global order, triggered by a miscalculation that effectively handed Canada the keys to a new, multilateral reality. The crisis did not start in the high-stakes friction zones you hear about daily. It began in a closed-door meeting where the architecture of the North American economy was being redrawn, without Canada in the room. A delegation from the United States, operating with a level of secrecy that mirrors intelligence operations rather than trade diplomacy, finalized a framework that was intended to be a death blow to Canadian industrial sovereignty. This was not a negotiation. It was a unilateral extraction strategy. The core instrument was the North American Manufacturing Priority Act, a policy document that essentially weaponized tax incentives. The directive was unmistakable: to qualify for maximum federal support, strategic production, battery manufacturing, semiconductor fabrication, AI infrastructure had to be located not just anywhere, but specifically within the United States. The provision offered a 15% tax credit for any company willing to abandon its Canadian operations and relocate southward within 18 months. This was paired with a massive redirection of $94 billion in agricultural contracts, soybeans, wheat, beef, and pork, moving from Canadian suppliers to American ones overnight. Washington assumed that by applying this crushing pressure, they could force a vassal state into submission. They viewed Canada not as an ally, but as a resource-rich quarry, a source of raw materials to be extracted, leaving the high-value manufacturing to remain exclusively on American soil. They were wrong. And the person who made them regret that miscalculation was not a politician chasing headlines. It was Mark Carney. To understand the sheer magnitude of the counter-strategy that unfolded, you have to realize that this was not a reactive scramble. This was a response prepared with the analytical precision of someone who has spent decades at the absolute apex of the global financial system. While the administration in Washington was celebrating their perceived leverage, Carney was already deep into the second and third order effects of their decision. When the details of the agreement emerged, Carney did not issue emotive press releases, nor did he beg for concessions. He initiated a three-part strategic outreach, not to Washington, but to Tokyo, Berlin, and Brussels. He was signaling that the North American relationship was no longer the only game in town. Within 48 hours of the administration's return from Beijing, Carney stood before the cameras in Ottawa. No teleprompter, no notes, and delivered a message that went viral globally, a message that dismantled the bargaining chip narrative in seconds. He laid out the reality. Canada is not a concession. It is a sovereign industrial power. He stated, with chilling clarity, that the misreading of Canadian patience as weakness would be expensive. This was the opening move of a six-part economic counteroffensive that had been in motion long before the public learned of the Beijing Agreement. First, Canada moved to invoke the USMCA dispute resolution mechanisms. This was not an emotional outburst. It was a legal trap. By challenging the relocation incentives as potential violations of the very trade agreement that Washington authored, Canada injected immediate, catastrophic uncertainty into the boardrooms of every corporation considering the move. Second, Ottawa announced an emergency $40 billion sovereign fund. This was the direct antidote to the attempt to starve Canadian mining of investment capital. While the administration tried to redirect Chinese investment away, Canada secured commitments that effectively internationalized its critical mineral supply chain. Third, Canada fast-tracked a massive industrial partnership with the European Union. This created an investment corridor that moved European capital into Canadian assets at the exact moment Washington was driving valuations down. They didn't just replace the missing capital, they fundamentally locked European, Japanese, and South Korean economies into a direct defense of Canadian resource security. Fourth, the government released a weaponized economic impact assessment. This was data designed for the people who actually run the economy, the bond traders and the corporate strategists. It highlighted that 3.2 million American jobs are directly dependent on Canadian supply chains. They laid out the arithmetic of interdependence in a way that Washington could not refute. Fifth, Carney engaged in direct, granular outreach to the CEOs of 11 major American corporations. He didn't issue threats, he did the math for them. He laid out the regulatory nightmare of the streamlined U.S. approval process, which, in reality, takes 4 years, against the operational readiness of the existing Canadian infrastructure. 7 of those 11 companies immediately paused their relocation plans. Finally, the agricultural sector, which Washington thought it could shatter, began a rapid diversification into India and Indonesia. The short-term pain was undeniable, but the long-term result is a more resilient, diversified export architecture that is no longer held hostage by a single, volatile buyer. The result of this asymmetric warfare became glaringly visible in a single devastating moment in the White House briefing room. A journalist asked 3 direct questions about the cost of the USMCA claim, the 2 million American jobs at risk, and the administration's official stance on the alliance. The press secretary paused for 4 seconds, a silence that echoed globally. That silence was not just a pause. It was the visual shorthand for a policy that had completely failed to model the consequences of its own actions. We are seeing a profound structural shift. Washington's concept of Fortress North America was designed to create a unified economic zone on American terms, but the execution betrayed a fundamental misunderstanding of the modern global economy. By acting with such inconsistency, vacillating between 3 different positions on the China trade agreement in just 11 days, Washington shattered the institutional reliability that major capital requires to make long-term decisions. You must understand the gravity of what is happening. The administration is trying to fix the problems of globalization by retreating into national silos, while Canada is proving that it can pivot outward, deepening its ties with the EU, the Indo-Pacific, and the Commonwealth simultaneously. The query strategy failed because it assumed the raw materials, lithium, nickel, cobalt, would just sit there while the factories moved. But the global industrial machine cannot function without those materials, and those materials are now explicitly linked to a multilateral alliance that has a vested interest in keeping them out of American, or Chinese, monopolistic control. The irony is absolute. The attempt to enforce bilateral containment has produced an immediate, accelerated multilateral expansion. This brings us to the question that defines our current reality. Was the Beijing summit a tactical misstep in a larger, calculated game? Or have we just witnessed the moment where the superpower dictates the rules era hit a hard structural limit? Do you believe the White House is capable of resetting this relationship? Or has the damage to the North American alliance become the new, permanent reality of a multipolar world? The evidence suggests that the administration confused patience with weakness. And as the numbers show, that is becoming an increasingly expensive mistake. The corporate boardrooms are pausing, the capital is diversifying, and the silence in Washington is deafening. If you value the truth over the noise and want to remain clear-eyed as these tectonic shifts redefine our world, then you need to be part of this conversation. Subscribe to World Horizon View, hit that like button, and share this analysis with those who are still trying to make sense of the headlines. I am your analyst, and I will see you in the next one.